You ever been wondering, as a game developer playing Terraria, how you could implement a simple function like they do here with the inventory, where if you hover over an item, it shows you the name of the item, and then if you ever open the item, or open the inventory, it's going to show you more data about that item, and it's really not that complicated. We'll do it right here in Unity, here in just a second. So, things to remember. For this implementation, we have so when we're hovering over the item, it's going to show you the name, and it's also going to stay with the mouse's cursor, as we can see here. And every time we open up the inventory, it's going to show more data, and that text box is also still going to follow wherever that mouse location is. So let's go ahead and implement this in Unity. Alright, for this specific implementation of the Terraria hover effect, we're going to need 5 different scripts, and we'll go ahead and create them now. Let's go ahead, go up here, create script. The first script we're going to need is going to be the item script, and this item script will be responsible for being put onto any game object that you want to be an item. It's going to be holding the actual data for the item, and that data is actually going to be coming from another script. We are going to call this the item data SO, and that's going to be a scriptable object that we'll get into in a second. And then for the third script, I'm going to go ahead and create another one, and this is going to be the item UI controller. That script will be responsible for making the text box for the item appear and disappear whenever we hover over it or move around within the item's collider. The next script is going to be the item UI data, and this script is actually going to change the actual description of the text within the item box. So whenever you hover over different items, the text within that box is going to update based on whichever item you're hovering over. And the last script we're going to be creating is just like a testing script. As we saw in the Terraria clip, whenever the inventory was closed, you have a different set of text for the item, and whenever the inventory is open, you have a different, more expanded view of the text. And so this is just going to be the inventory script. And these 5 scripts will be used in combination with each other to get that effect similar to Terraria. And we're going to go ahead and hop into the first script here in a second. Alright, the first script we're going to be creating is going to be the item script. And real quickly, I'm going to go ahead and box out the basic layout for the script, and then we'll go into what each of the specific methods do in a second. And for a quick reference here, we are going to be implementing some interfaces, and these interfaces are just things, it's essentially a contract for the script. So every time we have an interface, it requires us to implement specific methods, as we can see by these 3 arrow lines here. And in Visual Studio, you can actually hover over the error, click right here, and implement interface, and it'll automatically implement that method, and we're going to go and do it for all 3 of these. Alright, so at this point we have the basic layout for the script. This first event here, so this is going to be an event to handle whenever the mouse goes inside a collider. And exit will be whenever the mouse exits the collider of that item. Move is just going to be fired every time the mouse is moving within inside the collider of the item. And these events are just going to be fired every time these methods from the interface are fired. And so we'll go ahead and implement those real quick. Alright, so we've implemented the events for each of these interface methods. And so every time these methods are called, they're going to be firing off these events, which other scripts are going to be able to listen to and get and receive data. And specifically for the enter event here, we have a form of data we're passing it, and we're going to be calling that the item event data, and that is just going to be sending this item's data over to whichever script is listening to it. And we can create that specific data type, and we're creating it here with this public class. It's going to extend event args, and event args is what the event handler is going to be taking, and all it is going to be taking in an item data, so just a scriptable object for the item, and it's going to be sending it wherever it needs to go. And then for the exit, we'll be firing the exit event, and for move, we'll be firing the move event. And for this right here, we have the question mark.invoke. Essentially, if we don't have that, if we just did onMouseEnder.invoke, it's still going to work the same. The thing that the question mark does is allows it to avoid a null reference exception. So if this event fired and nobody was listening and we didn't have the question mark, it would throw a null reference. But when we have the question mark, it's basically going to ask if there are any listeners, and if not, it's not going to throw any errors. So this is just an error protection. And then lastly here, we have this little error message here saying that the item data object doesn't have this sprite component, and we'll be adding that here in the next script. Alright, here we have the item data scriptable object, and a scriptable object is just going to be a data container, so it's not going to have any update or start method. And I'll go ahead and finish this out, and then we'll get into what it's actually doing. Alright, so here we've go ahead and fleshed out the entire bit of code. So the first thing is going to be the sprite that this item will have. So if you have a specific pixel art sprite or anything you want for that, this will hold that for anything else to be using it. And next is going to be the item name and description. These are just going to be strings that we're going to be passing into the item UI controller, which is going to be able to update whatever the item's name is and whatever the description of it is. And since this is a scriptable object, we're not going to have anything else in it. It's just going to hold this specific data. And if we actually go back to the item, we see that this error has now been removed. And so now this item, whenever it starts, is going to be updated with the sprite that is contained in the item data scriptable object. And then next, we're going to go ahead and get into the UI elements and work on those. Alright, let's go ahead and make the item UI controller. This script is just going to handle whenever the text box for the item appears and disappears. And this is also going to be the script that controls where the text box is moving. So if we're moving our mouse within the collider of the item, it's going to keep up with the mouse's position, just like it does in Terraria. So let's go ahead and flesh out this script, and I'll go ahead and explain it here in a second. Alright, so here we've gone ahead and fleshed out the basic structure of the script. Let's go over it real quick. So the first thing here is going to be the item UI data, which we'll go ahead and create in a second. And that's just going to be updating the specific data within the text box, and we'll have a reference to that. Next, we're going to have the public parent canvas. So this is just going to be the canvas that all the UI is going to be stored on. The adjustment vector here, this will change depending on how you're going to implement the actual text box, and this will prevent it from overlapping with the specific pointers. So if you have a text box that's too close to the mouse, it can get wonky with the interface methods here, so sometimes they can overlap and that can cause an issue. This will just change depending on whichever text box you're using. And the start and disable, we're just subscribing to the events that are being fired by the item class, and then assigning whichever methods we have here. So for the enter, we're going to update it. When we're exiting that collider, we're going to remove the UI, and on move, we're going to be moving the UI. And then at the very bottom, we're just hiding the UI at the start, because if we're not hovering over any item, we don't want the box to be showing up. And so all that's going to do, this is a very bad way to do it down here. It's just throwing it off the screen. There are different ways to implement this. This is just a quick and easy way to do it. And then next, we're going to be getting into the actual bodies of these three methods, and we'll be back in just a second. Alright, so here we've added a new class method, and it's going to be called update item UI position. So this is basically going to make it so that the text box actually follows the mouse. And here we're using the rec transform utility that Unity provides. And essentially, when we're working with a canvas, it's going to have a rec transform, which is different from the actual world coordinates. And essentially, what this line here is doing is it's getting the actual point of the mouse and transforming it into a rec transform so that we can get the mouse's position and make it so that it's going to actually correspond to the canvases. So it's changing a world coordinate into a rec transform. And then down here, what we're doing, we're just adjusting the coordinate a little bit, and that's where we're using the adjustment vector here, just so it doesn't collide with any of the other colliders. And then we're just moving the position of the actual text box here just slightly so that it's not going to interfere with anything. And this will also update it for the canvas itself. And then for the remove UI, we're just calling the hide UI function. Move UI, we're just going to be updating the position again. And so again, so whenever we're exiting the collider of the item, it's just going to remove the text box entirely. Whenever we're moving within the actual items collider, it's just going to keep it so that it's following the mouse's position. And then in the update item UI, which is where we're actually going to be sending the item specific data, we will add this here and remove this error in the next section. And we're also calling update position. And this is for whenever we're entering the item. So every time we just enter the item, it's going to update the position and send off the data that it needs. And so this is the whole script, and we're going to go ahead and get into the actual item data UI controller here in a second. Alright, here in the item UI data script, this is just going to be changing the data within the text box. And let's go ahead and flesh out the entire structure of the code, and we'll explain it here in a second. Alright, now that we've fully fleshed it out, let's go ahead and go over it. So this serialized field here will show up in the inspector, and it's just going to be the text mesh for the actual text inside the item box. Next, we're going to have a bool that's just going to tell us whether the inventory is open or not, so we can toggle which data to show and what not to show. Next, we have the actual data scriptable object, and this is going to be a reference so that if we are hovering with inside the items collider and we toggle the inventory, it will know whether to hide the data or to show everything. If we don't have this reference, we're not going to be able to determine what to show and when. So this will be super helpful for whenever we actually implement it. For start and disable, we're going to be subscribing to the inventories function, which we will work on here in a second. And this will just tell us whether the inventory is open or not. We have this void change item data. This is just going in and changing the actual text within the text box. And we're also assigning the new data to this. We're getting the data from the event, and we're just assigning a reference to the reference we have here in the script. And we're basically saying if the inventory is open, we're going to show the name and the description. If the inventory is not open, we're just going to show the item name. This is similar to how it's done in Terraria. And then we have the final method here, which is going to toggle the inventory data. And essentially, what this is going to do is allow us to show both forms of data. So show both the item name and description and the item name only from within so if we're inside the box collider and we toggle the inventory, it's going to know which one of these to fire. If we don't have this, it's not going to know that. And so this is everything for this script, and we'll go ahead and get into the last inventory script here in a second. Alright, for the last script that we're going to be needing for this tutorial is just going to be the inventory script. And this is just going to be a simple toggle that's going to determine whether the inventory is open or not. Let's go ahead and create this. Alright, so we've got the whole thing filled out. First thing is actually a different form of event. Earlier we had the event handler event, which takes in specifically an event args. Here in the inventory, we're just going to use an action, which is essentially the same thing. It's just a little easier to write, and this is why I'm doing that. In order to get this, we're going to have to implement the using system here at the top. And so what this action is going to require is a Boolean. And down here in the update function, we're just reading if the key T is ever pressed. You could also do this with the new input system, but this is just a simple way to do it really quickly. And this little chunk of code here is just going to toggle whether the inventory is open or not. If the inventory is closed and we press it, then the inventory is open. If the inventory is open and we press it, then the inventory is false. And then whichever reference or whichever value that this Boolean is set to, we're going to be sending it off with this event. Same thing, except the other ones had the object sender and the event args. This is just going to take in a Boolean, and that's going to be this private Boolean here at the top. Alright, so we've gotten all the scripts. Let's go ahead and make it work in the Unity engine. Alright, back here in the Unity engine, the first thing I need to mention is that within the item data scriptable object, we need to add the line create asset menu, and this will allow the scriptable object to be created from within the Unity engine itself. There are other arguments you can add here to make it more specific, but for our use case, this is all we're going to need. So once we've added that line and it's recompiled, we can go ahead and go up here to create, and then item data scriptable object. We're just going to call this test item. And here are on the right, we have the required fields for this scriptable object. We have a sprite, and for this instant, all I'm going to be doing is using a default Unity engine sprite. For the item name, we'll just call this item name, and then we'll see, actually we'll call this test item, and then we'll say test item does stuff, for the description. And so here we have a created scriptable object, and this can be used from within anywhere as it's an asset within Unity. And then, so now, one of the first things we're going to need to do is on the main camera, or really any game object within the scene, we need to add an event system, and that'll just be added here. And then down here, where it says add default input modules, just go ahead and click that. This will allow the interface methods to actually be able to fire. Without this, the on hover, enter, and move functions wouldn't work. And so once we have all of this, we have the base ready, and we can go ahead and actually implement everything. I'm going to go ahead and get everything fleshed out, and then I'll be right back and explain it all. Alright, so here at this point, we have an empty object just for the UI. This is just for a cleaner look, and it has everything contained, so you don't have to look at the whole cascade of everything. Next, we have the canvas that all the UI will be on top of, and that we're just on top of the UI, just going into UI and canvas. We're not changing anything about the canvas. It's just the default implementation. And then as a child of the canvas, we're actually going to have the container. And this is where we actually add new things to it. So whenever, and this is just an empty game object, we'll just do create empty, and this will show up. And then we're going to be adding the vertical layout group here. And we're not going to be changing any of the values except for child alignment. We're going to be doing upper center. And then for controlled child size, we're going to do width and height here. And then use child scale, none of them, child's force expand. We're going to do width and not height. Next, we're going to be adding a content size fitter, and both of these are going to be set to preferred size. And then we're going to be implementing two of the scripts here, the UI item UI controller and the item UI data. And here, for the item UI data, we are just going to be adding here in a second the actual container that's going to be changing the text itself. We have the parent canvas up here. We can just go ahead and drag and drop the parent canvas, and the item UI text will be added here in a second. So I'll be right back, and we'll go ahead and assign those here in the inspector. Alright, so here we're back in the container, and then for the item UI data, we're just going to be assigning it right here. This probably isn't the best way to implement it, but just for this example, that's what we're going to be doing here. And then for the item UI text, it's requiring a TextMeshPro, and we have this created here. And the values for here are just for this specific implementation. I'm changing the font size and the color a little bit. I'll also probably be adding a different font asset just to make it look a little bit different, but you can go ahead and change that to whatever's going to fit your game and your style. So back here in the container, we can go ahead and assign that here, drag and drop. So at this point, we have all of them assigned. Here in the UI panel, and we're just going to be doing UI, and we're going to create a panel, sorry. I'm going to be creating a panel, and we're going to be adding another vertical layout group, and these are the constraints we're adding to it. We're doing width and height on the child size, nothing on the scale, and then both of them on the fourth expand. These values for the padding are also for this specific implementation, and we're also going to be using a specific image, which I will put in the description if you want to copy along with me. And I'll go ahead and implement right now, and we'll get right back to it. Alright, so if we're using the link that I put in the description, you'll get this element here, and you can go ahead and import it with the import new asset. So here's that panel that I'm going to be using. In the sprite editor, we do want to change some things for at least this specific implementation. We're going to be bringing all of this just inside the lines of the box. So this will basically give a field for where the text can go. If we had it outside, then that means the text could go everywhere else. So once we have all of this just inside the little boxed region of the text box, we'll go ahead and hit apply. So that is fully set up. And then back in the UI panel, it's asking for an image. Instead of doing a background, we're going to go ahead and drag and drop our new panel item here. So we can see here, we have this new text box element, and it has the text inside. And if we actually go here and try to add more, it's going to expand. And then so this will be helpful for whenever we're adding the new item text. And we can see as we add new text, it's going to expand with the box. So now that we have this entire box set up, we can go ahead and implement an item itself, and we'll do that here in just a second. Alright, let's go ahead and create an item. So we'll go ahead and create an empty game object. We'll just call this item. And then here we can go ahead and add the component of the item script. And then also when we add this, it's going to add a sprite renderer and a box collider due to the lines of code we actually had at the top. So here we have require component of box collider and sprite renderer. So every time we add the item component to a game object, it's going to automatically add these other two, box collider and sprite renderer. Here back in the item, see, it doesn't have a sprite currently just because it's going to be assigned whenever the game starts. We have a box collider. We're not going to set it to isTrigger for now. Actually, we are going to set it to isTrigger. We don't want other things to run into it, so this is just going to be there, so nothing else will run into it, but the mouse can still interact with it. And then here it's asking for a scriptable object, and then we also do have this test item that we had created. We can go ahead and throw that in there. And here in the editor, we can actually move this to the side here. There's nothing there because it doesn't have the sprite assigned yet, but as soon as we start, it should automatically show up. And the last thing we need to implement is going to be the inventory, just to test whether the inventory is opening or not. And that we can just create an empty game object, just add the inventory script. And so everything should be set up here. We can go ahead and test it now. There was a quick error. I just realized that the item itself is way off the map. Let's go ahead and reset the transform back to 0. Then if we go in here, so there, it's actually within the canvas itself. We'll go ahead and offset it a little bit, and let's go ahead and test this. So as we can see, the game started and it has that knob sprite because it was assigned within the item scriptable object. Alright, we have just one little thing we forgot to add here on the camera. We need to add a physics 2D raycaster. And this will actually fire the raycast, allowing everything else to work correctly. So now if we test, go ahead and start it here. We have the knob, and actually you can see here on the scene view that the text box has gone off to the side, and it also has the default text in it. And this is that little line in there that's storing it down to -2000, -2000. So if you go back here in the game view and hover over, we can see that it's flickering, and that's one of the errors I was trying to avoid. And so this is happening where the interface for the on-pointer enter is kind of messing up. It's trying to get two things at once. It's seeing the collider for the text item, and it's kind of flickering on and off. We'll go ahead and fix that here in a second. Object. Alright, found the issue. It's here in the container. If we go to container and use one of these little widgets here on the side, click on this one right here, the fifth one down. It's going to show these little boxes that you can use to move everything around. I think we need to change this here, this middle circle. We want it to be in the top left corner, or you can technically change it to wherever you want. If you want it to hover to the right of the mouse, put it in the top left corner. If you want to hover to the left of the mouse, you want to put it in the top right corner. So once that little circle's in the top left corner, we can go ahead and start. Alright, and whenever we hover over the item, we have test item. And since we implemented the inventory, whenever we press T, we open the inventory. It's going to say test item. Test item does stuff, and whenever we close the inventory with T again, it's going to go ahead and remove it. And also, we can move around within this little collider here that's going to follow the mouse's location. Open the inventory, there it is. And whenever we scroll off, it's going to go away. The inventory is still open. I haven't pressed T, so that information is going to be there. If we press T again, there we go. That information goes away. And if we press T while we're not even hovering on it, so now the inventory is open, we're back there, and we have all the information. Press T again, that information goes away, and we can see how easy it is to create another item. We go here on the left and just duplicate the item and create a new item data scriptable object. We'll say this is item 2. We'll give this one a different, we will give this UI sprite. We'll say this is item 2, and the description is this does more damage. There we go. So we have that scriptable object created. So if we go back here and press F, we can zoom in on where that's going to be. We're going to want to move it away from the first object. Go ahead and move it down here. And all we have to do is replace the original test item data with the item 2 data. Go ahead and load it up here. Alright, so we have our first one, test item, press T, still does the same thing. Then we go here, we have item 2, press T, opens the inventory. And so we can see the information about the item is changing when we hover. The box collider itself is following it. We can open and close the inventory. And that is everything for this tutorial. I hope you guys liked it. There's a lot that could probably be improved upon, and I hope in the comments you will tell me. I'd love to learn and get better as a developer. That's what I'm here for. I hope I could open your eyes a little bit and see how easy it is to actually implement some of this stuff, and we just break it down into smaller parts. And I'll look forward to the next video. Whenever we press T, we open the inventory. It's going to say test item. Test item does stuff, and whenever we close the inventory with T again, it's going to go ahead and remove it. And also, we can move around within this little collider here that's going to follow the mouse's location. Open the inventory, there it is. And whenever we scroll off, it's going to go away. The inventory is still open. I haven't pressed T, so that information is going to be there. If we press T again, there we go. That information goes away. And if we press T while we're not even hovering on it, so now the inventory is open, we're back there, and we have all the information. Press T again, that information goes away, and we can see how easy it is to create another item. We go here on the left and just duplicate the item and create a new item data scriptable object. We'll say this is item 2. We'll give this one a different, we will give this UI sprite. We'll say this is item 2, and the description is this does more damage. There we go. So we have that scriptable object created. So if we go back here and press F, we can zoom in on where that's going to be. We're going to want to move it away from the first object. Go ahead and move it down here. And all we have to do is replace the original test item data with the item 2 data. Go ahead and load it up here. Alright, so we have our first one, test item, press T, still does the same thing. Then we go here, we have item 2, press T, opens the inventory. And so we can see the information about the item is changing when we hover. The box collider itself is following it. We can open and close the inventory. And that is everything for this tutorial. I hope you guys liked it. There's a lot that could probably be improved upon, and I hope in the comments you will tell me. I'd love to learn and get better as a developer. That's what I'm here for. I hope I could open your eyes a little bit and see how easy it is to actually implement some of this stuff, and we just break it down into smaller parts. And I'll look forward to the next video.